Last autumn we took delivery of over a 100 kilo butchered half carcass of grass-fed Jersey beef from locals Dean and Julia Ryan of Lake Janice Farm. This meat, along with our 40 chickens, roughly 100 kilograms of pork and a small amount of goat meat, sustained us on the homestead for an entire year. We had some of our beef butchered into steaks, both on and off the bone, roasts and mince. All these cuts were placed in the freezer to use as needed for the year ahead. However, there still remain some large cuts, as well as bags of bones and fat that we put aside to preserve in a more traditional way, because at this point our chest freezer was completely full. We'd mentioned in our video showcasing Lake Janice Farm last year that we would share with you some of the ways we prepared this delicious Jersey beef. So now, as I prepare our final piece of brisket from the freezer, we're going to go back in time to share with you some of the recipes and traditional preservation and cooking techniques we use to enjoy our Jersey beef throughout the year. So we're beginning to render out all the tallow that we've gotten here from the half cow that we got. So we're just running it through the mincer. This is the best way we found to get tallow quickly and efficiently. Running it through the mincer. To get started, I'm going to take what we already have in that bowl there and put it in a pot, just so we have a little bit of fat to get it all going. There's the fat here, and we've got it going on a medium heat. An hour or so later, our fat had started to render down nicely. While rendering, we did lots of stirring to prevent solids from sticking to the bottom of the pot. I also had the exhaust fan cranking in the kitchen to try and reduce the smell of tallow permeating our home. The tallow was done once we stopped seeing small steamy bubbles and the cracklings had gone transparent and a nice golden colour. I decanted into jars, placing a tea strainer over the lips to catch our cracklings. This tallow is such a wonderful product. We now use it exclusively for any deep frying we do on the homestead. Tallow was traditionally used for deep frying before folks started using cheaper industrialised vegetable oil. It also makes an excellent lip balm for chapped lips and overnight moisturiser if you don't mind the smell, which for this grass-fed animal was a kind of mild buttery aroma. Amazingly, once cooled, the rendered fat is so yellow it actually looks like it could be clarified butter or ghee.
In here we've got some, I guess you'd call it blade steaks, 1/4 inch thick sliced, or 5mm, 6mm if you like. We just dry salted them, got the moisture out for about an hour, and then dipped them in apple cider vinegar, and now I've sprinkled cardamom, coriander and black pepper on there, and now we'll dry them for half a day and we'll see how they come out. So this is a bit more of a, closer to a traditional biltong. Okay, the dehydrator's done its job. Here's what we're looking at. These are about right for me. So I'll normally get my biltong now, cut it into these strips. There is nothing wrong with leaving it, you know, like a steak strip like that. I just find that it stores easier like this, and I can sort of grab a few and just have a lunchtime snack. So I shouldn't put it in my mouth, but it's so good. There we go. That's a pretty nice, neat compound steak that you can take with you anywhere. Ready to go.
We pressure cook the bones in water for several hours to make a simple but rich and gelatinous beef bone broth. We use the same piece of kit to pressure can the broth in jars to make it shelf stable. We use this broth all the time as a main ingredient when cooking hearty soups and stews, but it's also great on its own as a nourishing snack. We asked for our ribeye steaks to be left on the bone by the butcher so that we could smoke and cook them using the reverse sear method over our custom fire pit in the winter. This steak was left to slow cook and smoke from the radiant heat of the fire for roughly 3 hours, turning the steak halfway through for consistency. We then cooked each side on an extremely hot pan over the open flame until they had a nice crust, And then I also grilled the fatty side of the steak directly over the flames to get a nice colour on the rendered fat. We really enjoyed our grass-fed ribeye Jersey steaks cooked in this fashion. The meat was so juicy and tender as it was slow cooked over the fire, yet it still held its shape and chew. I actually had quite a hard time neatly cutting it up for our guests on that particular evening as it was so tender. The yellow fat in the middle of the steak had also rendered slightly and was perfect in texture. Topped with freshly grated truffle and truffle butter, it was a very decadent course for our fireside meal at Millgrove Truffle Orchard last year. I will be cooking again this winter for visitors to Millgrove Truffle Orchard, so if you're interested in coming on a truffle hunt and trying some of my food in Manjimup, then I've popped a link in the description of the video where you can make a booking. This was a giant piece of chuck that's been sitting in the bottom of the freezer that I didn't get round to preserving when we first got our beef. And with the last big piece of chuck, when we first got our beef last year, I put it into jars and canned it. So we had really convenient quart jars, so 1 litre jars of chuck steak sitting on the shelf that I could just add any sauce to. So it was really quick. It was like, could make a sauce in 5 or 10 minutes, add the chuck steak already cooked to it, and then we had an instant meal. So I think I'm going to do the same thing again. I could have potentially roasted this or minced it or actually made stews inside the jars themselves, but I kind of like the flexibility of having the meat just plain in there, and then you can just make whatever sauce you feel like on the day, or use a pre-made curry paste or something like that, and then you just add your chuck steak to it. Ordinarily, chuck steak would take 2 or 3 hours slow cooking on the stove, or all day in the slow cooker to cook. So this way you can pressure can it in a jar in 90 minutes and then it's ready to go, ready to eat straight out of the jar, or to add to different sauces and things that you want to make with it. To can chuck steak, I follow the instructions that came with the All-American pressure canner, based on the USDA guidelines. Chopping steak into roughly 3-inch cubes and then firmly packing it into warm, clean jars. I then added a teaspoon of salt per jar, cleaned the rim with vinegar to remove any fat, salt or other residue that may affect the seal, and then attached my wet jar rubber seals and lids using 3 clips in a triangle pattern. I pressure cooked the jars at 10 pounds pressure for 90 minutes and then removed the jars once the pressure in the pot had dropped back to 0. You could tell that we had a good vacuum seal when we removed the jars from the pressure cooker, as they were still bubbling away on the kitchen bench for some time. Once cooled, the jars present like this and will last at least 2 years on the shelf. This is the last piece of brisket roast. We did the same thing with this when we first got our cow. We did some salt beef brisket, and this is the last thing we're doing with the brisket. This was at the bottom of the freezer, so I hadn't quite got to it. It was a big piece of meat. Wasn't sure what to do with it. Thought we might smoke it, but never got around to it, so we ended up doing this. This prolongs the life of the beef even further. So I put it in salt for 2 weeks, and then I've had it in fresh water for 24 hours, and I've changed the water twice. I'm going to pull it out of the fresh water now, and we're going to slow cook it in the oven. So it was sitting in a brine like we used last time, quite a salty, sweet brine with aromatics, juniper, bay, garlic. So I was sitting in that for 2 weeks, just in a cool, it was actually in the fridge, but in the middle of winter, you can also just have it in a cool space, anywhere below 10 degrees, and it's fine. And the product that comes out of this is really nice. It's kind of like a fancy corned beef, I suppose. So we're just going to slow cook it in the oven with some aromatics that I got from the garden. The herbs have nearly gone. It's May, so we're about to go into winter. So I just sort of picked the last of the oregano, thyme, and sage, and then these guys are doing actually really well. These are perennial leeks, so these are going to go in the broth. And then we've got a couple of our red onions. You can see they're already sprouting, so I'm going to put them in as well. Hopefully they haven't gone bad inside of their sprouting. So we'll take the beef out. I just had this tub of water holding the meat down in the fresh water. I also had it holding down in the brine while it was in the fridge. Didn't have the proper weight, so I just did it like that. So it's come out quite swollen and soggy looking, but it's definitely much better once it's it'll present much better once it's cooked. I'll put this big bit in the stainless pan, and hopefully this bit's slightly smaller to go in the other pan. There we go. So that's pretty much it for this salt beef. I've just put in celery, onion, and that bouquet garni that you saw me making. I'm just going to cover it with water and then cover them in foil and cook them in a low oven, 150 degrees for 2 to 3 hours until the beef's all tender and falling apart. Okay, this here is our beef. I just left it to cool in the liquid. With foil over it for 24 hours in a cool room. Now I need to remove the fat. We're going to cook a little bit up for dinner. We're just going to reheat some for dinner to have it with roast potatoes and lentils, and the rest I'm going to vac seal and freeze for another time because our fridge is full of food at the moment. So yeah, we'll freeze this now. It was taking up a big footprint in the fridge. Now it will only be taking up a smaller footprint. It's quite a lot smaller than what it was before we roasted it. If you remember, these bits had to go in separate tins. Now they both fit in the one tin. And the broth we will probably can up tomorrow because we have got another lot of broth on the stove, so we'll be able to do that with the pork broth that we have on the stove. So I'll vac seal the larger bit and roast up some of the smaller bit, and then we have a little bit left over in the fridge for later on in the week. I've used this beef hash before in recipes that I've shared with you, particularly one with some of our fresh potatoes from the garden. That was really nice, like a potato hash breakfast dish, really good. I'm hoping that I might also make brisket tacos this week, so I think that'd be quite yummy. But simply reheated in the oven, sliced and reheated in the oven, or with some choice fresh baked sourdough in a sandwich is just delicious. So I'm sure that's how we'll eat it the rest of the week, but the rest can go in the freezer for another time when we feel like it again. Oh wow, so it's come out really nice, still pink in the middle, even though I didn't add any sulfites or anything like that to it. So that's a nice looking corned beef, or slow cooked salt brisket. Let's pop that in the oven and try a little bit cold. Really good. Quite salty. That's really nice. So I've vac sealed up half. You can see it takes a much smaller footprint than when I initially pulled out these cured pieces of meat and popped them in the oven yesterday. So I'm going to pop this away in the freezer. The other half we'll eat for the rest of the week, and dinner's nearly ready. So we'll pull that out and serve up some salt beef with some potatoes, lentils, and some mustard. We hope you take with you some different ideas about how to cook and preserve beef after watching this week's episode. We have just recently re-provisioned our freezer with some more Lake Janus beef, and this time we've got a lot more minced beef. So we will be preparing a lot of ground beef recipes in the future. If you're interested in finding out about our favourite ground beef recipes, let me know in the comments section below. As always, thanks for watching and subscribing, and if you enjoyed the video, hitting the like button really helps us out by recommending this video to like-minded audiences. See you next time, friends.